right, so this is the passing of the torch because we've made it through a number of different Botvinnik games, and then we started the reign of Tau, as short as it was, but I thought it was appropriate to end the last Tau game that I'm going to show with the last Botvinnik game I'm going to show from the Tau Botvinnik World Championship match. And I probably picked one of the games that doesn't rank high on the list, but as a King's Indian player myself, I really like this example game and wanted to show it. So Botvinnik starts with his English, and we get to a Finachetto, like pretty much one of the main lines, King's Indian, E5, and it's important to understand in these structures for white that if you don't play E4 now, then black's going to have the opportunity to play E4, get space, kick your pieces around. So E4 is pretty required. And there's a lot of different ways to play here with E takes D4, knight C5, with A5 to solidify your pieces, or a lot like what Tau played in the game with C6. After H3, this is another very flexible position to play. Queen A5 is pretty popular here, or it's like going back instead of knight BD7, you can play C6, and Queen B6 or Queen A5 are both very playable. Like sometimes you want to choose this move order for what Tau did in the game to try to coax white into side variations. In a Grandmaster Repertoire Series book, I believe it was by Catronius, he does quite extensive work in this variation after Queen B6. This is his career opening, and it was a ton of analysis. The book personally wasn't my cup of tea because it was just a ton of lines and not a lot of explanations, so it would take forever to go through and actually annotate properly and try to understand it. But this line with C5 is quite critical and interesting, and Tau being Tau, of course, would want to go into this type of mess against Botvinnik. Botvinnik is a very controlled player, especially as he was getting up in years, so it's no surprise to see him not going to the most critical variation. He plays D5, capture, capture, and we have a static pawn structure. Knight C5 makes a lot of sense as both knights are pressuring the E4 pawn. Knight E1, so the bishop can defend E4 and potentially the knight can come to D3. Notice how white's kind of lagging behind in development here. This isn't the most critical variation for a reason. White just has a game. Whereas black, on the other hand, I mean, he's got all of his minor pieces developed, and he's just like magically just got a little bit of something here because white played somewhat passively. Knight D3. Yeah, okay. Trade. Now I got an open file for the rook. Rook B1. And here's a key moment with how to create a plan and what to do. Because these are the situations where I find my students messing up the positions most frequently. When they have accomplished what they meant to in the opening, the castle, maintain a pawn in the center, or by and large control the center, and then develop their knights and bishops effectively. So here we've done this. So the next question is, where should we be playing? Well, we can't really change the center because of the locked center, and when the center is locked, you play on the wings. So then the next question is, which wing should black be playing on? Queen side or king side? And here with the queen on B6, and it looks as if white with the rook on B1 is able to get space a lot easier than white, it, to my logic, would seem like the plan's going to be on the king side. So the only way to change things on the king side is to start with knight H5, with the idea of potentially playing F5. So bishop E3, tickle tickle on the lady. Lady runs away. Queen E2. And now rook C4, using the time to pressure. FC1, and magically, just like Lucky Charms, it's delicious. We've got the rooks doubled on the C file, and Black improved the position considerably because the rooks weren't nearly as good. I mean, imagine the rook on a8 a couple moves ago, and now a battery. So king h2, and white potentially is thinking about the one to play f4 over here, and black seizes his moment to try to change the pawn structure with f5. Capture. And here's another common mistake that I see, where a lot of my students will go, well, I'm going to take back with the bishop in order to hit the rook on b1. But it's typical that you want to control key squares in the King's Indian. You want full possession over e4, so normally you're going to see pawn takes. But in this case, because we can get the tempo, we get the tempo with bishop takes f5. But I like to point that out, that the norm would be taking with the pawn, but in this case, of course, hanging the knight's not going to be a good situation for you. Rook a1, you got to defend it. Now begins a forcing sequence. White, he's still just kind of like here. He's holding on. Everything looks okay. And black's kind of reached the pinnacle of his position. I don't see a way to improve. I mean, I know the text move that's played in the game, but I personally would just be like, okay, like knight f6 or something, in order not to get my pieces forked. Tal finds a more creative solution in knight f4 and goes, you want a free knight in order to open up your king and give me play? Bob Vinnick's like, okay, well, you got to do what you got to do. Grab. Gets another pawn, so 2 pawns for a piece, with the white king a little bit more open. All of black's pieces coordinated, attacking things. Rook a b1. In between move, f3, hitting the queen. So we just trade ladies. Rook b3. Hitting the bishop on d2. I'd love to take it for free. The bishop that's been bad the whole game now comes alive. Bishop e5 check. Tickle tickle on the rook. Oh, we're going there. And we have explosions. Now bishop e4. We don't want to trade down because we're down a piece. You got to keep the tension. Try to get your stuff back. Bishop e5. There's my pawn. And it's so clean how he handles this because he's just improving his position. And the pieces, even though he's up a piece, he's not doing anything with it. Yeah?
Are you blocked or are you white?
We're looking at the game from black's perspective. Yeah. So, but both of these guys are world champions, with white being Bob Vinnick, who we've looked at in a number of games, and then Tal playing black, who we looked at in the last couple games. So with d5, king f2. Protect your rook and attack at the same time, the best types of moves in chess. And it's clean because we get to this end game. He had to give up his piece to get here. But then this outside pass pawn just wants to go home. That's all. He just wants to go home. So we're going to use the king, and we're going to help him go home. We'll use the king and the pawn. We're just going to walk him up the board. And Botvinnik resigned after this check because to show how this is going to go, white doesn't have enough time to come down here and grab the pawns and create a threatening passer of his own. So I can even come here. That's probably more accurate. And if he keeps checking, he's just going to improve me and give me more time. Say if I grab then, I'm going to go check. And one key idea here is once I go here, if check, I can block with the rook. He tries to stop the pawn, I can queen immediately. Or probably even better is doing this. So there's no way for white to trade the rook for the potential queen. Well, I lied. But this is winning anyway. So white's not going to be able to do much, as black can just come down here And once the pawn is eaten, we know the king and rook checkmate, which is in one of the videos. So that's that for this clean King's Indian game by Tal. And even in this type of simple position, Tal's able to find, in the critical moment, knight f4, and just really change the nature and flavor of the game against his highly esteemed, multiple-time world champion opponent. Like, you got to know your opponent when playing games, and the more of a mess Tal could create, the better chances he had against Botvinnik. That's that.